Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started here in a minute. We've still got people logging on, it looks like. I'll go ahead and introduce myself for those of you who this might be your first webinar that you're joining us in this series of webinars that we've been doing. So I'll introduce myself in my Indigenous language. Dinawe Magani Duk, Dindisi Indigenous Makinak Waju and Dunjiba, Migizi and Dude. Little stage fright there. So what I said was a traditional Ojibwe protocol greeting. My name is Dindisi, which means blue jay in Ojibwe, and I'm from Turtle Mountain Reservation, and I am Eagle Clan. My English name is Christine McCleave, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And our mission is to lead in the pursuit of addressing and understanding the ongoing trauma of regarding the U.S. Indian boarding school policy. And this is episode 6 in our webinar series, and the beginning of the fall, part 2, fall series. And just want to go over a few logistics of the setup here that we have with technology. For those of you who haven't been on these webinars before, so to the right hand of your screen, you will have a little panel that allows you to configure your viewing so that you can see the presenters, you can see our faces, but you can also see the screen that we're sharing. Right now I'm projecting a slide that says the name of the webinar today and our presenter. You can make any of these smaller or larger depending on how you want to configure your setup. There is also on that same panel a box that says questions. So as our presenter is sharing with us, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them there. And at the end, when we do our Q&A, I will go ahead and read your questions, and Dr. Yellowbird will answer those for us. At this time, I'd also like to administer a quick poll just to see who we have on the webinar with us. So I went ahead and asked you all if you're a boarding school survivor, a descendant, or neither. So go ahead and answer that poll. It looks like half of you have answered that already. And it looks like we have a few boarding school survivors, a lot more descendants, and about half of you said neither. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. Thank you. And the next poll is, what sector are you listening in from today? Tribal services or Indian urban services, social work, child welfare, academia or higher ed, K through 12 or early childhood education, or other? A lot of you from other. I got to figure out what that other category is. This polling only allows me to give 5 responses. So, okay, great. It looks like 15% of you are tribal services, urban Indian services, 12% social workers, 24% from academia, 3% K through 12 or early childhood education, and 47% other. So thank you. We will go ahead and shoot me a chat and tell me if you're answered other, what that is. I know we have a small percentage of people who are just listening in because this is of personal interest to them. So that's great too. Okay, well, without further ado, our presenter today, we're very excited and honored to have Dr. Michael Yellowbird, who is also a member of our board of directors, to be speaking with us today. Dr. Yellowbird is a professor and dean of the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Manitoba. He is a citizen of the 3 affiliated tribes, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara, from North Dakota. He has held faculty appointments in the schools of social work at the University of British Columbia, Kansas, Arizona State, and Humboldt State University. Most recently, he was professor and director of the Tribal and Indigenous Peoples Studies program at North Dakota State University. His teaching, writing, and research focuses on Indigenous peoples' health, the effects of colonization and methods of decolonization, neurodecolonization, and mindfulness approaches neuroscience, microbiome science, genetic science, and ancestral lifestyles. It's quite the lineup. Like I said, we're really excited to have you here today, Dr. Yellowbird. He is also the author of numerous scholarly articles, books, chapters, and co-author of Sanish Arikara Ethnobotany. He's the co-editor of 4 books: For Indigenous Eyes Only, the Decolonization Handbook, For Indigenous Minds Only, a Decolonization Handbook, and Indigenous Social Work Around the World Towards Culturally Relevant Education and Practice, and also Decolonizing Social Work. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Dr. Yellowbird. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
There you go.
So I'm gonna, let's see, start with a PowerPoint presentation. Just want to welcome everyone, and thank you for logging in. So I just apologize for this because I had to download it from Dropbox. I don't have the original here, so it's going to cover most of my screen right now. So what I wanted to really talk about today was the medicine wheel, but what I've done with the medicine wheel in terms of trying to turn it into a model that incorporates Western indigenous based science along with traditional science and lifestyle research. So I know we have a very limited time, and it's hard to know where to start and to begin, but a lot of work that I've done has been around the area of decolonization. By what I mean by that is, how do we begin to recover from the periods of colonization? What kinds of things do we need to do? And what I've discovered in my work is that there are some really important ways that we need to kind of begin to think about or rethinking about how we heal, because there are a number of different kinds of things we have not considered in the healing process. So this particular slide, this first one, is a slide I did at a presentation I did at Northern Michigan University for the Center for Native American Studies, but it's very similar to what I was going to show today anyway. There's just a couple of slide differences. It's part of a book manuscript script that I'm working on, and I'm really thinking about how do we privilege Native American ways of knowing in terms of healing. So just going to talk briefly about the medicine wheel, the quadrants, and how I've updated them, what we can learn from our ancestors and their worldviews, why they were correct, and why returning to those ways of healing are really sort of backed up not only by ancestral knowledge, but also now Western science catching up to that. I want to share some key terms today. Won't get a chance to go through it all because this is a rather long presentation, but you'll get a pretty clear idea of what I'm talking about. This is part of my book manuscript that I'm finishing. So I start with just talking about how our brains, our genetic profiles, the microbes, that live within us, and our lifestyles, how they were shaped by the relationships we had with our environment. So that's really become the sort of the cutting edge stuff now, is how are we related to our environment? You know, something that indigenous people have known for a long time. And living like a Westerner has, you know, really important consequences for our health and well-being. So when I think about, you know, the medicine wheel, of course, I think about the different sacred sites in the world. Again, don't have enough time to go into this, but in my book I'm finishing, I talk a bit about sacred sites in the world and why they're important. So what I want to talk about today is the medicine wheel on Turtle Island, and what does that look like, right? Just from what we know and from the ancient past. So we know that probably, you know, the one that's most well known is in the Bighorn Mountains, the medicine wheel that's about 10,000 years old, that drew in all kinds of people from all over North America and who knows where else. And that, you know, this medicine wheel has different kinds of connections to very important points of the cosmos and the universe, and that's where healing began, right? And so there's a line, there's all these different spokes that exist. Originally, it looked a lot like this, where it was at the edge of a cliff. They call this the place where the eagles sound or sing, where people would make a pilgrimage to this place, just like they would to any other holy place in the world. And, they would be there, they would fast, they would pray, they would leave offerings. And we see that now today. If anyone has ever been to the Bighorn Mountains and saw that, you'll see that, dream catchers are left there now. This is a rope surrounding the place. And people leave all kinds of things, all kinds of very sacred items that are there, like these tobacco ties, these feathers, these prayer offerings that are left there. And when you walk around that particular sacred site, you can see how many things have been left there, these prayer flags. And of course, with the prayer flags, we know there are all kinds of prayers, for the world, for people, for the universe, for all sentient beings that live. And this is really what Indigenous people are really about, right? Today, we've got a Western system that does not incorporate a holistic approach in understanding how things are connected. So many of you have probably heard this before, but we see it around the world. These are Buddhist prayer flags, very much, like the prayer flags that we see among Indigenous people all around the world. Colors are significant, position is significant. Here you see prayers at a Sundance, for example. Most of you, probably heard of a Sundance, and some of you have probably been Sundancers before and know that, these particular prayer flags contain tobacco and the prayers of the people and the petitions that they sent out to others throughout the world. So that's the thing. So we start to see these things crop up in different parts of the country now. Now, Valley City is not known for having a large native population, but someone recreated the medicine wheel from the Bighorn Mountains there in Valley City, North Dakota. We see that, the medicine wheel shows up in places like Haskell Indian Nations University, which was a residential boarding school before. We see that we can find it in other ancient markings. This is Judakula Rock and Cullowhee, North Carolina, where the Eastern Band of Cherokee are. I was fortunate to have a chance to be there and to visit with elders and take into this really important rock, this that has all kinds of markings in it. So if you look to this part of the rock there, you see, a turtle, obviously, but also you see a medicine wheel. So it's not that we just thought up the medicine wheel, in the last 20 years or something. This rock here is, marker here is 3,000 years. It dates back to the Archaic period, and the one in the Bighorn Mountains goes back to 10,000 years. So what do we see besides that? We travel all around North America, and we begin to see that those spokes, that medicine wheel, at different parts of the country. That was in Utah. This next one coming up is a slide of the Hopi Indian Reservation, where you see, those circular sorts of movements, that kind of thing. So the circle, the connection has been around for a long time. And people have found healing in this circle, right? And you can see it there in the Mojave Desert in this sun symbol, where you would see the spokes actually on the inside of the wheel. Now you see the spokes on the outside of the wheel. So it's interesting to kind of see how different tribes and tribal people, our people a long time ago saw different ways to configure, this medicine wheel, this sacred symbol. This is my home reservation, North Dakota, the 3 affiliated tribes. Medicine wheel that was put there after a Sundance one year by a number of young people. I was one of those young people at that time. That's still there, still used as a marker. We can, also see the medicine wheel, here again, another ancient rock, these weren't, I'll tell you, see all these diverse tribes, all these different places, this same symbol is cropping up all over the North America. So what does it mean to my work? So my work then is a really holistic approach to what I call neurodecolonization. How do you change the way the mind functions and operates? And how to use mindfulness and all these other things to begin to heal? So when we look at, the medicine wheel, we understand that our cultures for thousands of years And that's really important to understand. Thousands of years have been shaped. The experiences we've had, the perceptions that we've had shape our brain's plasticity, meaning that how our brain functions and the structure and how it looks. Those things have affected our DNA, our microbiome, which are the microbes that live inside of us and on us. There's a whole new great circle of life we have to consider. Western science and Western thinking has kind of spent a lot of time getting us to scrub away all the parasites and the microbes that we have, and caused a major imbalance in our bodies that has implications for our health and well-being, especially in terms of our mental health, in terms of anxiety and depression, mental disorders, and even suicide has been implicated in a microbiome in our bodies that's unbalanced and lacking in diversity. Microbiome, the healthy microbiome is very diverse, meaning that we eat all kinds of plants and all kinds of varieties of fiber, that kind of thing. We don't do that anymore. We live on a Western diet that has resulted in obesity, hypertension, many types of cancer, anxiety disorders, and on and on and on. And hopefully I'll get to some of that. But culture and experiences have also changed the way that our genes express. You've probably heard about epigenetics and what happens, when we are exposed to something in the environment that changes our genes so they express good in a good way or not so good way, right? If we're exercising, eating right, we're sleeping well, we're doing mindfulness meditation, and we're around friends and a number of all these other kinds of things, then our genes can express in very important ways that keep us healthy. All those opposites then express genes in other ways that create, a decay sort of a message to our bodies. Our experiences also shape our different kinds of brain cells, like mirror neurons. I don't have enough time to get into that, but just to remember that as our brain waves change and our perceptions change, so do these specialized brain cells that we have, in our brains, and actually, even in our gut, we have a number of neurons in our gut too as well. So the brain and the gut are connected. So if you get gut feelings, or your brain and your gut are working together all the time. So all these things change, they're altered. Neurotransmitters that send messages in our brain and through electrical responses, and modulators that help us learn or help us keep information in, also change with experiences. So it's much more complex than just saying, well, we've had a really terrible sort of experience with boarding schools and residential schools. It gets down to the molecular and the cellular levels as well, all the way down to transmitters, neurotransmitters, and modulators. This part of the brain is about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, how the brain changes, how the brain grows new cells. And there's many different kinds of neurochemistry that I talk about in my book that's coming up, but I'll mention some of those. The human microbiome here, as I said, we are populated with trillions of bacteria, and many of these bacteria are essential for our health and well-being. Our ancestors had good, healthy, diverse microbiomes because they ate a lot of plants. They ate a lot less meat than most people think, and that's pretty clear. They had to have meat in order to grow larger brains, and fat to grow larger brains. But we are definitely, indigenous people are plant-based people. I used to be a strong believer in the paleo diet and what people were saying about eating a lot of meat. If I had a chance to show you my DNA results that came back, I would show you that I have many, many markers, and my family has many markers in the DNA for saturated fats and diabetes that go together. Eating too much saturated fats brings on diabetes more so than complex carbohydrates. So it's not one size fits all. We have to understand that some of us are very different in terms of our what we genetically inherited, but most human beings on the planet, most of us, not everybody. There are certain populations like the Inuit that can eat a lot more meat that are plant-based eaters. So, oops, sorry. Let me go here back to this one here. What is going to heal us then is understanding all these things, because after we get past the body here, the human microbiome, Then there are many contemplative practices that are pretty clear in the research and literature that our folks did, our ancestors did. And finally, there is, sorry, I don't know why it's doing this here. Finally, there is genetic inheritance and telomeres and emotions that all go together. So there's the mind, body, spirit, and the emotions. A lot of these have crossover here. So let's go on to the next slide. Decolonization then really is about, one hand is examining beliefs, whether it's indigenous or non-indigenous people, about indigenous people or about our cultures, learning about ourselves in relationship to the communities where we interact and the people whom we interact with, right? But it's also about valuing and revitalizing indigenous knowledge, and this second part here. And that's what I want to talk about, weeding out settler biases or assumptions that have affected indigenous ways of being in very negative ways. This is what the process looks like. There was the other world, our ancestors that, for thousands of years had been living certain ways, slowly changing and genes mutating very, in a very systematic and helpful way. But when colonization came, that other world fell. It was reborn into this world where we have a lot of what we call mismatches, evolutionary mismatches. For example, a mismatch is traits that were once advantageous in the past became, maladaptive or problematic because of change in the environment. One of those, there's many of them. One of those things that kept us from having things like diabetes was eating a plant-based diet and moving a lot. One of the things that we have today that was advantageous to us before was not wearing shoes but going barefoot. Now today that's no longer advantageous to us, right? Because we have to wear shoes in society. But there's a downside with some mismatch. We get, fungus, and we get, all kinds of foot, problems, and with our feet and so on. So there are many different kinds of things. So what I'm thinking about is to strip away some of those things that exist here and restore some of our cultural practices. And these are health practices. And also anything that's new that we can use in terms of ideas, thinking technologies. And that's what I've done with the medicine wheel, is to try to use the medicine wheel in a way to include advancements in technology and Western thinking and science that's going to empower indigenous people. Neurodecolonization is a big part of the work that I do, and neuroplasticity, understanding how the brain can change. So the first part of the term neuro is really a lot about, the specialized brain cells that we have that send signals. Decolonization, of course, is what do we do to weaken the effects of colonization? And neurodecolonization, then, the third bullet point, involves combining mindfulness approaches with traditional contemplative practices to resculpt our neural pathways in our brain that are negative pathways that are very problematic in terms of our thinking, our beliefs, our emotions, and behaviors. And we want to replace those with new, healthy, productive ones, right? What are some examples of things that we can do? Well, movement is one. Running, walking, dancing, singing, those things. Another thing that our ancestors did that we don't do now, and they did this for religious reasons, but they also did this because food was short, because they sometimes didn't have enough to eat. Animals moved. So for thousands of years, we developed all of the hardware, and we evolved to fast. Fasting is very, very important for us. Intermittently fasting from anywhere to, 16 to 20 hours a day from food. And I'll talk about that. Sleep is really important, meditation, collectivism, hanging out with one another, laughing, and HSP is heat shock proteins. And how do we increase the heat shock proteins in our cells, which then help us become more healthy? So I'll talk a little bit about that if I get enough time to. So let's talk about this first part of the medicine wheel, the mind, about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, something that our ancestors did to have a healthy mind, right? What did they do? Well, there are 8. I've got more than this now. They did running, they did dancing, they did singing, right? They slept well. They rows that, there's a circadian clock that we have. I'm sorry, this one just doesn't have it on there, but I don't have some of the slides there, but just that we have a circadian clock where, it shows us that there are certain times of the day when we're at our best and we're not at our best. And times when our melatonin that helps us sleep begins to produce, and when it shuts off, so we sleep better, we rest better. Laughter, humor is also a big part of it. Collectivism, intermittent fasting, and all these things. So you've seen this. So let's start taking a look at one of these first ones here. First slide. Oh, before I get into that, I mentioned parasites, right? Parasites, we think about, everybody, is probably, making faces and stuff, but we evolved with parasites. Just like we evolved with eagles and bison and fish and mountains and trees. It's really, really important to think about that there are some parasites in the other parts of the world, and the rainforest, for example, among the Chimene Indians that have parasites that they've evolved with. You can get exposed to parasites when you're a little kid. It'll make you sick for a couple of days, and then your body balances out. So the new thinking around parasites, certain kinds of parasites, not all parasites, some parasites are very harmful, but some parasites help us keep our health, balanced. And among the Chimene Indians in the rainforest, I believe it's of Bolivia, not remembering exactly where they are. They have parasites, but they also don't have anxiety disorders or depression. They don't have heart disease. They don't have hypertension. They don't have any obesity. And the theory now is that, these kinds of parasites actually help us, because what they do is they break down some of the carbohydrates, just like the microbiome does, or they play a really significant role. So I just want to mention that. I don't want to get into that too long because that'll take a big, long lecture in itself. So what do we do? This is a native guy from Mexico. And the Tarahumara Indians, what they do is run, but we all have this tradition of running and moving and so on. What does running do for us? What does movement do for us? Well, first of all, you have to understand, if you don't run, you don't walk, then you're going to have all kinds of health problems. It's essential. We evolved to run. We evolved to move. We have the biology and the physiology. We have the lungs. We have the hips. We have the legs, and so on. Big reason that we have so much depression now is because we have a lot of issues with, not being able to raise different neurochemistry in our body. That's so important to our brain. We evolved as persistence runners. And what does that mean? Well, we used to run after our meals, after the rabbits or the deer or those kinds of things, right? Or we went fishing, we moved quite a bit. Now, we can say we go to the grocery store, we go to the gym, and we work out. That's not enough. We still have genetic markers that have to be activated, right? And that's why Western science is coming up with more and more that we have to move more and more. If you've seen the Fitbit says 10,000 steps a day. We know that's an undercount now today when we look at hunter-gatherer populations. You need to be taking 19,000 steps a day. It's so important. Well, it's about our evolution, but it's also about our physical health and mental health. It improves our brain's working memory, our processing speed. It improves the brain's executive function. The next bullet point below that, what is executive function? It's our ability to delay gratification, to say no to that piece of fried bread or that chocolate cake or to that soda or whatever it is. That's what we have, genetics that all are part of our brain's executive function too, that help us delay gratification. When you do not delay gratification, those neurons and those genetics that are not expressed then go quiet, and you have a very difficult time delaying gratification, reaching for food, whatever. It's not a weakness, it's a genetic trigger or a switch that goes on. We have the ability to avoid distraction when we run. We can stay focused, right? there's a quantum difference between kids back in the day of our ancestors and kids today about in terms of distraction. Kids, were highly focused, for a number of reasons. Part of it was the movement, and it proves cognitive flexibility, our ability to move from one thing to the next thing, from one subject to the next subject, right? And that's critical in terms of growing new brain cells. The biggest thing facing us today are neurodegenerative diseases, especially for Indian folks, right? We don't eat well, we don't exercise, we're getting higher levels of dementias and Alzheimer's disease. But listen, just dig this, man. We have hunter-gatherer populations that have genetic variants for contracting Alzheimer's disease, but they don't get it. Why don't they get it? Not anything close to how we get it. They don't get it because, sorry, something happened to my screen here. Let me just load this back up again. All right, they don't get it because, it's dietary, it's sleep, it's movement, and all these other things, right? Very traditional kinds of things. So if you're afraid of Alzheimer's, you shouldn't be if you're living a traditional life where you're moving and doing all these other things I'm going to talk about. So because what prevents Alzheimer's, right? An increase of what they call brain-derived neurotrophic factor. There's a factor that helps our brains grow, and it really increases when we exercise. How do you remember brain-derived neurotrophic factor? Well, what I do, I'm not a brain scientist, although I study the brain quite a bit. I'm an interpreter of the brain, I guess you could say. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, how would I remember it? I say, big darn native fella. Big darn native fella. What do I mean by that? Every time I go for a run, I think of this big native guy in my brain, and he's pouring this BDNF on my brain as I run, right? The Miracle-Gro for the brain. And what does it do? It grows more neurons. That's called neurogenesis, right? More. Running increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the big darn native fella. Miracle-Gro for the brain, you grow more neurons, and it helps prevent dementia. Running now is like a miracle drug, right? All right, so it also initiates what we call LTP, long-term potentiation, meaning that the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the body and the brain and the heart and the arteries and the blood vessels all work together in the memory of the movement, right? It's like that with dancing, it's like that with singing, it's like that with walking, it's like that especially with running. Next slide coming up here. Here's dancing. Wow, I never knew dancing was so important, but when you look at indigenous cultures around the world, and all cultures, they danced, had all kinds of dances. And indigenous people, we still have a lot of these traditional dances, not as many as we used to. But something that happens with movement and dance is endocannabinoid rises, concentrations rise, and moods improve, following dancing, following singing, and exercise, right? So now we know that why our ancestors danced, then you would see the colonizers come in and say, all these Indians do is sing and dance, and they feast, and they're out there on the hunt all the time. They're out there hunting and gathering all the time. These are genetic memories. They're also the genes that have developed. That's why we need to dance, right? Well, when we dance, what happens? Singing for the first part. Singing increases levels of AEA and OEA and PEA. These are all endocannabinoid concentrations in women, and it improves the mood, but it does it for men too as well. When you go out and you dance, when you dance hard, your mood improves. Why? Because endocannabinoids are being raised, as well as BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So that's that part of the medicine wheel. And when you cycle, endocannabinoids rise again. All has positive effects. Singing, look at that. Singing was the most beneficial activity And so when you look at kids, they sing. When you look at people in groups, they sing. When you're driving down the road in your car, you sing. When you're in the shower, you sing. When you're at ceremony, you sing. One of the things that's very important for us to remember is that unlike all other creatures on the planet, there are very few of us that use our vocal cords to sing, except for a few primates and birds. And, you know, maybe some people say maybe whales and dolphins sing. But humans and birds have the closest in terms of their vocal cords. Before we could talk, before we could write or sign, we sang messages to one another. We made vocal sounds. So that's part of our evolution. That's why we sing. That's why we have the capacity to sing. And look at this. When people sing, it's one of the most beneficial things for raising endocannabinoid concentrations and improving mood, right? Here's what we know from the biochemical evidence. Increases what they call novel signaling messengers. And these novel signaling messengers help us then improve the mood, reduce stress and anxiety, enhance memory, protect brain function, and reduce pain. Wow, all of that in just singing. And I tell this when I tell people, if you want a healthy organization, everybody should have a organizational song, or people should sing there. Not just bring in an elder to come and sing some songs. Everyone should sing songs, and not just a serious song, but sing happy songs, sing playful songs. This is part of our heritage as Indigenous people: singing, dancing, movement. So then we're going to get into another part of the brain, and sweat lodge and saunas, right? So we know that all groups and people around the world have done sweat lodges and saunas. And so the sauna is one of the ways that it drives heat shock proteins. Heat shock proteins are found in most of our cells in our body. What do? They really play this critical role in protein folding, which helps maintain protein structure. If you've ever seen a brain that's been ravaged by alcoholism, or well, let's say mad cow disease, because that's more relevant. Mad cow disease, what happens is that when you eat diseased meat, prions get released into the body, make their way into the brain, and they begin to misfold the proteins of the brain. So when you look at the brain, that's all sort of eaten up looking and all really nasty looking. It's protein misfolding that's happened. This happens to all of us as we age. Our brains, protein misfolding starts to happen. That's why dementias happen. That's why Alzheimer's happens. But new research, and people knew this probably way back when, but didn't have the other part of the science to look at it at this level, the molecular science. Now we know that high levels of healthy heat shock proteins, which are a sign of longevity, disease protection, and healthy skeletal muscles can be released. I tell Indigenous people, all right, so people, they say, well, we do the sweat lodge. That's not enough. Unless you're doing a sweat lodge 3 or 4 times a week and staying in there at really hot levels, it's going to be good for your spiritual part, but it's not going to do enough for your heat shock proteins. I tell people, build saunas in your community, build saunas at your organization so that you can go into that sauna 20 minutes, 3 times a week, and it's got to be hot. 150, 170 degrees. It's got to be pretty hot so that your body then begins to get this mild adaptive stress that happens in the body. It also works with very cold showers too as well. But these are things Indigenous people did. Jumped in nice cold water. They sat in really hot environments. And so now this stuff is all starting to make sense to me. Sleep. Sleep is critical. This is my res dog at rest. I like to joke about this res dog because he's laying there on the couch, probably at his mom's place, doesn't have his own home, probably got puppies all over the reservation, doesn't have a job. That's my joke anyway. But what about sleep? Mentioned it before. We disrupt our circadian rhythms, and it's critical. I'm sorry, I don't have a slide in here for that, but there's some very good slides that tell you that circadian rhythms need to be on point, meaning that if you're taking blood pressure medication, there are certain times that your genes are ready to take that medication in and make it work more effectively. When you need more and more of that, it's not necessarily the failure of the medicine or the failure of you. It's the failure of the circadian rhythm, that you're not taking it at the right time, right? And that's also true about heart drugs and diabetes medication and so on. The molecular clock keeps in sync with the sun. The sun rising, the sun falling is how we are supposed to live, right? We're supposed to turn off the lights when the sun goes down. When the sun comes up, we're supposed to turn them on. We're supposed to be outside for at least an hour or two every day out in the sun. Because when our circadian clock breaks, guess what? All the more reason we're going to get diabetes, dementia, heart disease, and our brain actually shrinks. So we're colonized by cell phones, tablets, televisions, and floodlights, a floodlight society. Sleep is crucial for childhood development. Poor sleep is linked to learning disabilities. Poor sleep for elders is related to Alzheimer's disease, because when you sleep really well for 7 hours to 8 hours a night, and you're dreaming and you sleep really well, your brain actually relaxes enough, the cells relax enough so that you've got cleaning fluids, chemicals that come through your brain. And what they do is they take out the junk, like amyloid proteins, which are a really prominent factor of Alzheimer's disease. Research is going on now that's looking at, you know, how the lack of sleep contributes to the build of amyloid proteins in the brain, and that leads to Alzheimer's. We don't live like our ancestors. We don't sleep like our ancestors. In fact, one of the things that people are doing now is they've got these different kinds of things, and that's why decolonization is bringing in new technology, where they bring in the sound of a fire crackling next to your bed. Why is that important? Well, evolutionary science tells us that at one time we slept around a fire. Our ancestors slept around a fire that kept us free from, you know, cave bears, from the enemy, from lions, from panthers, from leopards, and that's true. We look back at that, and we don't think it has anything to do with us now today. We're completely wrong about that. We still have genetic memories about those places and times when things at night were not safe. So what we know now is that someone who's developed, you know, different kinds of sounds that make us feel safe so we can sleep. Sleeping pills, things like melatonin, very short-term fixes. They will not solve Alzheimer's disease. Sleeping well will. Laughter, humor. This is something I never realized. I know that, you know, my family and people from my res and a lot of Indians that I know, they love to laugh. They really like to laugh. Tell all kinds of funny stories and humorous stories, but guess what? It really is in our genes. It's part of our genetic profile. All the studies that have been done thus far tell us that people with these short alleles of this particular gene, this 5-HTT-LPR, have much more humor in them than people that don't have this genetic variant. So think about this for a minute in terms of boarding school. All the children that came from tribes that have this particular variant here, where they needed to laugh and find humor, went to in their own tribes, had that laughter. That was a positive environment. When they went to traditional boarding schools and places that was negative environments, they suffered because those alleles didn't get expressed, making them more prone to historical trauma, to anxiety disorders, to depression, and so on and so forth. We need to laugh. Laughing is in our genetic profile, influences memory, learning, helps our blood vessels relax. It releases all kinds of healthy neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin and other neurochemicals. There's other things that, you know, won't get into, but look at this last bullet point here. Evidence has been found that collectivist cultures, this is native people, collectivist cultures are more significantly likely to have individuals carrying this humor gene, right? And all these different nations around the world. If you want to be healthy, you have to laugh. It's important to have humor, right? And again, I apologize because I've got some really important clips, funny clips in here that I think you'll see. So if we get back to the medicine wheel here, that's just the mind part. I'm not going to get through the whole thing today, but I want to get through some of it, and maybe at another webinar we can talk about other parts of it. This is fasting and intermittent fasting. What we know is this, it really has important effects on your brain. I mean, people think, well, fasting, we lose weight, whatever, we lose muscle. That's not true. When you fast in a way that our ancestors fasted for certain periods of short time, that's not starvation. That's very healthy for you. What happens? Well, let's take a look, right? We evolved to fast. This is from 1636. This Jesuit Catholic missionary, Paul Lejeune, was among these Indian hunter-gatherers in Canada in 1636. This is my hashtag, decolonize your need to feed, right? So this is what he observed. This is what he wrote down in his journal, talking about the Indians. I saw them in their hardships and labor suffer with cheerfulness. Imagine that. Hardfulness and really, labor going on, suffering with cheerfulness. I found myself with them threatened with great suffering, right? He wasn't used to fasting, but we evolved to fast, right? They said to me, quote, we shall be sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 days without eating for lack of food. Take courage, Janini. Let the soul to be strong to endure suffering and hardship. Keep thyself from being sad, otherwise thou wilt be sick. See how we do not cease to laugh, even though we have little to eat. I think this also relates to trauma. See how we cease, not to laugh, even though we've been through a traumatic period in our lives. We need to laugh, right? And this is what we've discovered from intermittent fasting, that this guy here, Mark Manson, Walter Longo, Krista Veride, especially Walter Longo, the guy in the center, says that when we fast for 72 hours, we can almost completely rebuild our immune system. When we fast for 24 hours, something called autophagy happens. Autophagy, auto is self, and phagy means eating ourself. Sounds kind of bizarre, but we're not eating ourself. What we're eating is mutated cells, organelles, viruses, and bacteria that are not healthy. And when we eat those, our body gets stronger, it gets leaner and healthier. We survive longer. Our depression and anxiety, fears, and mood disorders go away. And our microbiome changes. When we fast for 24 hours, there is a little microbe called Akkermansia mucinophilia, sorry. And what this bacteria does is it eats, some of the mucus in our body, but it also sends signals to our cells in our body to thrive and grow. It makes us leaner, our muscle tone improves, and our fat melts away. So these systems are all working together. I know we must be getting close to the end of the time here. So this is what happens with intermittent fasting, right? Intermittent fasting I'm talking about is not 24 hours all the time. For me, I fast every day. I'm on a fast right now. When I finish about 1 o'clock, I get home to have lunch about 1:30. I'll have fasted for 20 hours. But I'll eat from about 1:30, and my last meal will be about 5:30. And I do that. This is how our ancestors did it. They didn't eat 3 squares a day and snacks in between. At most, they may eat a couple of meals a day, but often they ate 1 meal a day. And as you saw from our other ancestors there in 1636, they only ate maybe sometimes, every 3 days until food became abundant again. So we evolved to do that. Once that happens, all these other systems kick in. So what happens then when we fast? Improved glucose regulation. It's a no-brainer. Loss of abdominal fat and maintenance of muscle mass. We don't lose it. This is the science here, right? Again, reduced blood pressure and heart rate, increased heart rate variability, similar to what occurs in trained endurance athletes. That means that your heart rate goes up when it needs to go up, slows down when it needs to slow up. If your heart rate is at a constant level all the time, then you're either out of shape or you have some heart issues. Improve learning and memory and motor function. Number 5, again, let's get back to the brain. protection of neurons in the brain against dysfunction and degeneration in animal models, but now we have human models that are emerging of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, stroke, and Huntington's disease. Right now, fasting is very, very, very hot, right? It's one of these things that people are talking about. Everybody's doing it. But we have an advantage because we have the genetics for it. It's not like some people who are doing it aren't getting benefits, but we can have much more benefits because our ancestors evolved to fast. Here's the last bullet point. So Dr. Mark Mattson says, intermittent fasting is beneficial for our health because it imposes a challenge to our cells. And those cells respond adaptively by enhancing their ability to cope with stress and resist disease. So I want to go down to this last slide here to show you what he's talking about. Cognitive resilience, right? Cognitive resilience is this: the ability to overcome negative effects or stress on cognitive functioning. This is so beautiful because when you look at bullet point number 2, this gets back to pure indigenousness, right? This is indigeneity. Prior experience and training to deal with high levels of stress and uncertainty may improve cognitive resilience. So what did our people do? Our people made our young people go through high levels of training and stress, fasting, going without food, going on runs, all these, going for swims in cold oceans and streams. And, you know, they did it not just, you know, for some, when I talk to people, if you do rites of passage, they said, oh, we did this once or twice. No, they did it all the time. And so when these young people grew up, they had a stronger, you know, strength and resiliency. But now we know what's happening in their brains. So when you look at the second model of the brain, we look at risky coping here, not happening. But we look at this ventral medial prefrontal cortex here, that's happening in the brain. Again, not a neuroscientist, so what do I call it? I call it the very mad private first class, right? Why do I call it that? Because the activity is happening at the bottom of the prefrontal cortex here, holding up the rest of the brain. This is actually the underside of the brain here. What does it do? It's in the bottom part of the prefrontal cortex in our brains. The ventral medial prefrontal cortex is located in the frontal lobe at the bottom of this cerebral hemispheres, right? That's why I say it's the very mad private first class, because this first class is holding everything up. It's implicated in the risk processing of risk and fear. So when you have young people, or you do it yourself, you want to do bungee jumping or the fear of something, every time you do it more and more, and you get used to it more and more, this part of the brain lights up, right? So if you take a risk to talk about, you know, historical trauma, and you say, you know, I'm fearless, I can talk about this stuff, I'm going to approach it. Yeah, it's going to be traumatic for you, but guess what? The more and more you do it, the more activation you're going to have, and the more resilient coping you're going to have. That's why when people went out to war, and they had trauma in war, but they had war stories. They danced away, you know, the fear. They did, you know, these war dances, wherever it was, right? And they went out and they marked themselves before battle, you know, because risk and fear. So they went into battle. So you could, or they, you know, did ceremony, whatever it was, you could be sure that it was activating this part of the brain. Because why? It was inhibiting emotional responses. You know, there you get back to, remember the stereotype of the, you know, the Indian that didn't show his emotions, you know, that was, you know, you know, didn't show his emotion, no tear, whatever, right? That you know, was a stereotype. Now today we say, well, no, that was true. You know, when someone cut off a finger, when they cut their hair, whatever, they showed emotion only for a certain period of time, and that was well, and many tribes that was well regulated. Too much emotional expression then led to, you know, many different kinds of things. Now we know, if we just look at this model, too much emotional expression unchecked does not lead, that it prevents resilient coping, right? Finally, and in the process of decision making and self-control, gets back to self-control. Finally, the evaluation of morality. So just real quickly, when I worked in Northern California at Humboldt State University, I tell the story about the UROCs because They sent their young people up into the mountains with their grass skirts on at night, you know, with just their headband on and some eagle feathers and a prayer stick or whatever they went up with, what lived up in the mountains. And these are young people. They sent maybe, you know, 10, 15 boys and girls up there to run through the mountains, cold, without food. Mountain spirits lived there. Grizzly bears lived there. Mountain lions lived there. So risk and fear were going on. They had to inhibit their emotional responses and decision making, where to run, and have self-control, right? So you could be sure that their brain was lighting up with this resilient coping. And after I heard about it, then I read this article by this anthropologist who said, these people became some of the most courageous, thoughtful, compassionate, and moral people in the tribe. Makes sense. If you read this, look at this slide, makes perfect sense. That's what's going on. So I want to just go ahead and end here. I have a lot more, but I want to end here and maybe go back to putting switching off here. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Yellowbird. That was very, very informative, fascinating. So we have a few questions. If anyone else has questions, go ahead and send them in, and we'll go ahead and shoot with a few questions here. What is your opinion on coffee and caffeine, Dr. Yellowbird?
It's a genetic question for me. I do not have the genetic profile to metabolize caffeine. I've got other factors going on in me. Probably my ancestors were scouts and guards because I have higher levels of chemistry that keep me sort of on the alert. Some people, it's very good for them, you know, depending upon how many cups you drink. But most of the research that's been done hasn't really looked at genetic profiles. Some people, like myself, if we drink more than a couple of cups a day, it can cause a lot of anxiety. In fact, you know, a genetic test I took said that if I drink more than 200 milligrams of caffeine a day for a while, I could have a stroke or I could have a heart attack because I don't have the genetic, you know, profile to metabolize the caffeine. I didn't get that from my mother. I analyzed her genetics, and that lady can drink pot after pot after pot of coffee, you know. And she's 92 years old. So it's like, give me a cup of coffee. You know, me, I'm like, you want a coffee? Just a half a cup, I'll say. I got my dad's genetics there. My dad never drank a lot of coffee. So to me, it's a genetic question. There's health benefits for it. I don't recommend drinking anything but free trade, organic coffee. Then you'll get the benefits from the polyphenols, but don't drink more than 5 cups a day. But if you really want to know, have your genomics tested to find out whether or not you carry the variant that can metabolize coffee, because some people it can really cause problems.
Mm-hmm. So what genetics test are you referring to? Is that like a 23andMe or something like that?
One of them is a 23andMe. I did a 23andMe, and then once I did that, I got all the raw data back. I sent that to a company called Gene Food, and they reran my data to get even more information. And then I sent it to another provider, to Rhonda Patrick, who runs foundmyfitness.com, and she'll run she really protects your data. She'll run your data for very cheap, for $10, and it gives you a lot of information. But you have to be ready, because sometimes you get information back that'll tell you, you know, you've got a genetic variant for brain cancer, or you have a genetic variant for Alzheimer's, or for heart disease, like I do, you know. But the cool thing about that is that I know that there are fixes for a lot of these things. Prevention of tumors, prevention of diabetes, prevention of Alzheimer's, prevention of heart disease. And what Rhonda Patrick's site does is they give you all the fixes based upon the science and the research. So some people don't believe in genetic tests, and they believe that people are going to misuse your genetics. Well, you know, that's true. You kind of take a risk, but you find good providers that protect your genetics. I think it's been invaluable in my search to find out better health. I don't guess too much anymore. I know pretty clearly what I need to eat, how much I need to sleep, that I need to be around people, I need to laugh. I have a gene called COMT gene, COMT, and I know that I have an intermediate risk for anxiety and depression, which I've had before. I don't have any trace of that now, but I do have a variant for that, right? And I don't wonder about it anymore. I don't take any medication whatsoever, but I just use a traditional ancestral life. So.
Wow, that's great to hear. That's great. I know a lot of our people suffer from many of these things that you're mentioning, and so to know that there is a way to heal that through diet and movement and lifestyle choices is great. So another question, a couple more questions coming in here. So how can we fast when medicine requires taking it with food? This is a transplant recipient.
Okay. Well, I think the number one thing to do is to check with a really informed doctor, for example. And if your doctor thinks it's okay for you to fast for 12 hours a day and take your medicine with your food, and you eat maybe only once or twice a day, as long as you get your calories in, that might be okay. So just think about that. It's not, unless you have to take, medicine 3 times a day or whatever. So then another thing you can do is calorie restriction, meaning that you can reduce the amount of calories that you take. You'll get some of the same benefits out of that. Not as much as fasting, but you'll get some of that. But calorie restriction is not for everybody. It's for people that, can do it and don't have any health problems. Fasting is the same way, but we evolved to fast. But so think about it that way. If you can take your medicine, only once or twice a day, then think about taking it with a meal where you can get in all your calories, right? In a period of an hour or 2 hours. Let's say if you're on hour 20, 22, and 24, and you string out calories, 2,000 calories in the next 2 hours, you're going to be fine, right? And as long as you get the nutrients you need and so on. So, but I always check with the doctor, first of all.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned endocannabinoids for brain health. What do you think about the CBD craze going on right now?
I don't know enough about it other than I know that for some people it works wonders for pain. It's very, very good for pain, and it has, that's the endocannabinoid in it. That's the cannabinoid in it. And so it helps raise the cannabinoids in the body. From what I understand, it's that it's like something that helps the process transport even more. It stimulates that. But you have to be careful too, because what I've learned in a lot of the studies that I've read, sometimes you don't want to overdo it with anything like that too, because your body produces its own endocannabinoids. It's like it produces its own serotonin and dopamine. When you start taking synthetic substitutes for that, then your body then gets the message you don't need it anymore. So you want to work with the doctor, work with a really informed health provider that can kind of give you more tips about how to do that. So your body is your own pharmacy. It has what it needs, and so that's the thing. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, what is your view on sugar for Indigenous people?
Oh man, it's a poison. You might as well just crack out the whiskey and start drinking it. Sugar is a very, very toxic. It's toxic for everybody. Sugar in its present form is toxic for everybody. Forms of sugar that are really important to get are those whole forms of sugar, like in berries, like in whole fruits, and stuff with fiber, right? Even, there's some benefits to like maple syrup, There's some benefits to certain kinds of honey and so on, but we didn't evolve to eat that kind of sugar. We evolved to eat, sugar very sporadically and to draw from our food sources the glucose that we needed to continue to function, right? A lot of doctors and researchers today will tell you that you can live on a low carb diet forever. You don't need sugar or simple carbs, to do that. And that's true for the most part, but there are genetic factors that are involved too. Unless we understand what those genetic factors that are in play here, we do need carbs. But complex carbs, if you eat sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, brown rice, quinoa, things like that, you can get, all the sugar, all the glucose you need out of those sources. But if you want to throw in some blueberries or strawberries or any kinds of wild berries, that's good too, right? We did not evolve to eat the kind of sugar that we see today that's found, and that's one of the things that's driving a lot of issues and inflammation in the body. So these things, it's not just sugar alone that's going to cause Alzheimer's. Sugar, along with the lack of activity, along with the lack of sleep, along with the lack of, all these other kinds of things I've been talking about, is going to drive. These are all these drivers that are working together. So if one doctor tells, or somebody tells you it's just sugar, that's wrong. Although I think it's to me, for a lot of people, interestingly enough, I can eat white rice. I can eat refined carbs. I've got the genetics for it. I've been tested for it. I don't do that, and it says don't do it too much, right? My mother, on the other hand, doesn't have that. She's got a different genetic profile. She's carbohydrate sensitive. If her and I can both eat a banana and I'll stay pretty stable, her blood sugar will shoot up, right? Same family, but I got my dad's genetics there. So it's not one size fits all. We have to be very careful and understand, these different aspects of who we are. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Too bad we don't all get that genetic test when we are born, right?
Well, I mean, we can do it now. We don't have to do it when we're born. In fact, I think that's going to be the new wave that we're kind of moving things now today is Indigenous academics and scholars. People are interested in health. I'm working with folks right now just to do that kind of thing. I'm in Canada now, and I think we've got some ideas about how to work with people to develop some genetic testing that can be protected, that the tribes will have management over, but that's going to inform us about who we're working with. Because here's one thing I just wanted to mention. I didn't get a chance to show my last slides of genetics, but there are people in the population of boarding school survivors that have very different genetic profiles. Some people have a very difficult time getting over the trauma of that, and it comes back over and over again. Other people, not so much. So we can call those dandelion kids and orchid kids, right? The dandelion kids are the kids that are going to come back, and they're going to come back over and over again. They're going to be able to survive those. The orchid kids are the ones that are very tender and very subject to disruption. They're like an orchid. They have a different genetic profile. I won't use that genetic profile, but I'll use another one. It's called ADRA2B, ADRA2B. And people who have that genetic variant, ADRA2B, have a much harder time getting over residential school, trauma, and their memories stay locked into those areas. They can remember some of those things very vividly, and that's exactly what ADRA2B, the ADRA2B gene does. It's called emotionally enhanced vividness. So one brother may say that, it's really hard, I can't forget it, it just brings up tears. And his sister may say that, yeah, it was tough, but I got over it, right? You have to get over it. They may have two completely genetic profiles that are going on. So we can't just say that, boarding school trauma is going to affect everybody the same way. It's going to hit some people way harder than other people. And some people, it's not going to hit very hard at all. No matter if they went through very brutal sexual abuse or whatever, it's going to hit them. Don't get me wrong, they're going to feel trauma from that. But they're going to have maybe the genetics that they're more likely to recover, especially if they engage into things like I'm talking about: sleep, running, fasting, humor, and those kinds of things. They'll recover faster. So it's really important to remember that we've learned so much more about genetics that we have to really, really pay attention to that. It's a brave new world that's happening, and that's what decolonization is all about, is using that kind of stuff to help decolonize us from these traumas.
Well, that's really good to know, and a really good point that, everybody's experience is different, but also those genetic factors playing in there too. So one last quick question, and then we can wrap it up. This one says, the circadian rhythm was mentioned that gives optimal benefits when taking, for example, HPV meds. At what hour is best, or is it personal?
Yeah. So, here's what I'm going to advise all the listeners to do. Look at, if you've got access to Google, Google circadian rhythms, and then look at the research, circadian rhythms and medication. And then you'll actually see where that research has been done, where it's very new research, by the way. But you'll see, for example, a picture of a circadian clock, if you look at images in circadian clock, and then it'll begin to identify different areas where, for example, you don't want to go into surgery at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for heart surgery, because your chances of dying are going to raise exponentially. You want to go in about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, right? When people are more alert. So you'll find those models that are there. You also can look up Twitter. It's another thing I show too in another presentation. Look up Twitter comments and about anger and about happiness. You'll find that when people Twitter around the world, when they start Twittering, they're pretty happy. As the day goes on, and pretty soon they reach noon, and at noon comes, boy, they start getting pissed off. They're mad. And so the Twitters reflect that anger and anxiety. When they get home, things settle down. They have, they get some food. They sit down and they, take their shoes off. They relax, and they see some friendly faces. The tweets get happier and happier again into the evening. So that's a circadian rhythm in itself. So think about that, how you are when you feel best, when you like, I feel really alert, I feel really good. That's probably the time you should be taking that medication or going out for a walk or whatever it is. I don't feel so good, whatever. Probably not the time you want to take the medication or you want to go for a walk or whatever. But again, read the science, talk it over with your doctors. Most of them are going to scratch their head and look at you with blank looks because most of them don't know this research. But if you explore it on your own, that's something that's really important. I'm going to put in a final plug. That's part of my manuscript, the book that I'm working on right now too. So,
we'll forward to that.
It's been a pleasure for me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure for me to talk to everybody too. So,
thank you so much for talking with us today, Dr. Yellowbird. And do you know when your book is expected? You're still working on the manuscript, I imagine.
I just sent out the real rough draft to a publisher, so I'm hoping I'm going to finish it this year. So.
Great. Well, maybe 2020 we'll see that then, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This webinar has been recorded and we will be posting these on our website. Part 1 of the series has not been uploaded to the website yet. As some of you know who follow our emails and social media, we're short-staffed right now. So I intend to get those recordings up for you, and this one will be up there as well. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you can email us at info@nabshc.org, or you can go to the website, boardingschoolhealing.org, and send us a message through the website as well. All right. Thank you, Dr. Yellowbird.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.